Liebe Zuschauer und Zuschauerinnen,
Dear viewers and listeners, dear friends, greetings in God, and welcome to the series, The True School is Life. Today's topic is freedom, a topic that has preoccupied humankind for thousands of years. The word freedom is used over and over again, and all too often it is misused. Much is written and philosophized about it. Well, what is true freedom anyway? And how can we attain it? In one of the countless teaching and seminar hours that Gabriele, the prophetess and emissary of God, has given over the last 5 decades, she gave basic advice under the title, Take the Freedom, Become Free, Be Free. We are glad that we may read from it today. So let's listen and learn together. Gabriele begins with the words, Cosmic freedom is one of the divine principles active in the law of God, in the 7 basic powers. Without love, there is no freedom, and without freedom, there is no love. Many a one will now think, what does freedom have to do with love? And vice versa, what does love have to do with freedom? Let us first shed some light on the word freedom. Where there is no freedom, there is unfreedom, bondage, in short, binding. Thus, the binding is in the way of our freedom. Let us therefore explore the question, what is binding and how does it develop? Binding grows out of self-love, which says, everything only for me. We can take our freedom, that is, attain it, only when we truly love our neighbor, when we think of our neighbor with our heart, when we are well disposed toward them and do not expect anything from them. On the contrary, we give to them. This is what Jesus the Christ called for in his Sermon on the Mount. Give what you expect. In other words, you should always first give what you expect from others. Then you will gradually forget your own ego, the person-centered, egotistical thinking that revolves around your own personal well-being.
Love is giving, thus Gabriele. Those who do not reject their neighbor, but learn to understand them and stand by them, even in many a situation that is incomprehensible and difficult to see through, can take the liberty to say, I'll do what I can for you, but I won't let myself be bound. Of course, this presupposes that we, for our part, do not bind ourselves to our neighbor. To bind always means to hold on to our neighbor, to hang on to them, ultimately to make them dependent on us as well. We then give only so much that makes the other submissive. The one who realizes that he is bound might now think, I want to shake off this binding. I want to gain freedom. So I will push my neighbor to whom I am bound away from me. I will distance myself from him, forsake him, either internally or even externally. But we do not overcome the binding in this way. This is not freedom, but rather it is against freedom, because freedom is part of equality and also of unity. And in unity, there is always the responsibility towards our fellow human being. Let us recognize the difference between to forsake and to let go. To forsake means to turn one's back on one's neighbor, to let them down, to fail them. If we abandon our neighbor, either internally or externally, we are shirking our responsibility and likewise quitting the unity. God never turns away from His children. Why not? God is unity, and unity is love. Selfless, impersonal, always giving. He expects nothing for Himself and leaves each one of us the freedom to make our own decision and develop ourselves. God says, "You should," but He lets us go. We should learn to no longer bind ourselves to our neighbor, to let them be independent, and be independent ourselves. Therefore, to let go of our neighbor, so that they can unfold and we can unfold ourselves. Freedom develops from this. Gabriele also explains why it is so important for us to let go of bindings and unfulfilled wishes, because they make us unhappy. She said about this, "Let's look around us. Many people are unhappy. If we question our own existence, we will very soon feel in ourselves that people who bind themselves to us or people to whom we bind ourselves cannot freely develop. From this, it follows that those who bind themselves to others cannot freely develop. Each one of us strives for happiness. We want to be happy. Therefore, the question to ourselves is, who makes us unhappy? Or what makes us unhappy? Many a one will now say, I'm afraid to let go. It could be that I would then be alone. Anyone who lives in this fear has to recognize that he lives in bondage and not in freedom. Binding makes us unhappy. We never feel forsaken when we do not bind others to us and do not bind ourselves to our fellow people as well. Those who attach themselves to their neighbor are self-centered, selfish, unloving, and every lack of love makes us unhappy. We then expect our happiness from others. They should make us happy. They should give us from their energy. We don't want to give, but to take.
Gabriele lehrt weiter.
Gabriele continues, take your freedom, that is, win freedom, which means, first of all, to make sure we know what true freedom means. How often do we hear, I take the liberty to say or do this or that, which usually amounts to doing what we feel like doing, that is, doing what we want more or less ruthlessly without taking into account the freedom and concerns of our neighbor. What about freedom here? In reality, we harm ourselves and the other one, because the freedom we take for ourselves usually makes the other one ultimately unhappy. For many, to take one's freedom means to live at the expense of the other. If we analyze the word freedom and relate the analysis to ourselves, that is, question why we bind ourselves to our fellow people or allow others to bind themselves to us, we will realize that it is solely the selfish ego and the fear of perhaps being rejected by others. Many a person shrugs his shoulders in adversity and says, "Well, that's just my fate." Those who are so resigned to fate do not believe in freedom. Yet, we have the freedom to determine our fate ourselves, to remedy the causes in time with the strength of the Christ of God, or to reduce or mitigate an effect that has already occurred, for instance, a blow of fate. It depends on us, how we deal with the circumstances of our earthly existence, whether we truly live by actively overcoming it or react passively, bound by fate. Many people behave like slaves to their own human ego, and consequently subject to the influence of the ego of others. They bind themselves to their own weaknesses. Such people talk about freedom and do not know that freedom lies in their thinking, speaking, and acting. Every person determines for themselves their development and thus their path. They have the freedom to decide at every moment. Gabriele explains further. No person is free of moods and inhibitions. But our moods and inhibitions, everything that touches us, are indications from our soul. The movements of our disposition are the language of our soul. It speaks to us and asks us to question the moods, the inhibitions and movements, in order to become free from what we have imposed and may continue to impose on it through our feelings, thoughts, words, and actions. Alertness toward ourselves is called for. Before we commit a personal, all-too-human blunder, that is, before we fall back into our old mistakes, our faulty attitudes and weaknesses, we have already felt an uneasy feeling in our stomach area that we simply pushed aside. Thus, we may have gotten into situations that would not have been necessary if we had listened to this inner feeling, to the pointing finger of our conscience. That's why it's so important. As soon as we feel an unease, be it inhibitions, disturbances, a certain uneasiness, we should pay attention. Stop. Here, something is being signaled to me. Here, my subconscious is speaking. Here, my soul is speaking to me. What does it want to tell me today? Indeed, at this moment? Let's work it out and not be afraid to look at it closely, because these are certainly not always nice things. And if we are willing to become free of our evil, only then will we feel what true freedom means. An inner strength develops, and ultimately, also a feeling of goodwill toward our fellow people. We no longer expect anything from them. We can give them as much as we can without binding ourselves to them or that they bind themselves to us.
And Gabriele points out the following to us. The path to fulfilling the meaning of our existence on earth leads to freedom, to being free. We are on this earth so that with the help of the Spirit of God in us, we free ourselves in good time from our all too human aspects, to then follow the free path for our neighbor, without being dependent on them. This is the path of the human being to the kingdom of heaven. Everything else is a selfish path which many tread over years, decades, but which leads over and over again into this side of life. That is why there are so many people. On the other hand, the free path is to be free in good time, in order to truly serve our neighbor. That is life. That is the following of Christ. This leads more and more to being close to God, connected to God, and to inner security. This is the path for every human being, if they want to follow it. Only self-recognition, the knowledge of the truth about ourselves, makes us free. It often takes a little courage to look at oneself honestly, that is, unsparingly, especially if one has failed to do so for years. Without being aware of it, the demand of our ego is to often hide behind excuses that begin with, for example, I just want, or but the other person, or it's totally normal, and much more. Gabriele spurs us on and also gives us an exercise to help. She says, "Take courage, dear fellow people. Let us face ourselves. It is worth it. For who would not like to gain the freedom that leads us out of confinement, out of our compulsions, that enables us to think great thoughts, and ultimately makes us happy from within?" Let's take a brief moment now to think about ourselves. To think means to cause movement. I move what corresponds to my thoughts in order to look into the thoughts. Therefore, let's move the thoughts around the word freedom, and we will experience ourselves. Let's take brief notes. Let's record in keywords what went on inside us.
We continue reading. So now we have experienced the content of our own thinking. It is as if a stranger is thinking, because those who very gradually analyze the content of their thinking and talking initially think that what they are working out is not them. Let's face the facts. What hurts us, what hits us, is not another. It is ourselves. If we recognize today what binds us, we have the chance to become free of it today. Those who strive for a conscious life, who want to become clear, sincere, and free from within, in order to find their way out of the narrow circle of their ego, of being caught in self-centeredness, will make an effort to grasp their subcommunications, what goes on underneath what they consciously think, speak, or do. These people get to know themselves more deeply than the superficial person. They gradually free themselves from the binding to their own person, to their personal, human, and all-too-human aspects. They gain distance from themselves. They become better and better at mastering their lives and are able to help and support others ever more selflessly, that is, without the desire for recognition and ovations of gratitude. They are increasingly impersonal, independent, self-reliant, and free from within. The horizon of their consciousness expands. They attain a broad view, far-sightedness, and an in-depth view, and in this way become capable of truly bearing responsibility. Dear fellow people, these are motivating words to all of us, which can help us every day to draw closer to our goal, the freedom in God. Gabriele continues. Those who do not become free always shatter everything that is good. Let's look into our world, this lack of freedom. Everyone wants only to be courted by the other. For this, they start wars. Through this, they end up in dependence and much more. In the end, the exaltation before the other ultimately shows one's own weakness, that is, unfreedom. Every war, even in thoughts, is against the neighbor. It is nothing but one's own weakness. When nations wage wars, whoever attacks is always the weaker. War, whether in thought, whether in word, whether one country acts with armed force against another, war is always weakness. Freedom is a gift from the Father. From the freedom, the inner love and the inner connection to the soul of our fellow people, but also, above all, the communication to God, our Father, can truly be developed. Then, we no longer look at our fellow people, expecting them to do something for us. We are free within ourselves to develop the love for God. Again, Gabriele gives us encouragement with the words, "Dear fellow people, if we free ourselves from what still binds us by daily monitoring ourselves and clearing things up, then gradually freedom develops, which gives us the strength to help others selflessly here and there without thinking of ourselves." The purpose of our existence on earth is to regain communication with freedom, with the divine in us, in order to sense what God has in mind for us in this world. We should not be content to always follow our personal path from the cradle to the grave. But God wants that we, after a certain time, have acquired the inner maturity, that is, the inner freedom, to sense our neighbor in order to serve and help our neighbor.
In the following, a tip from Gabriele about how we can gain freedom and more inner values, that is, inner maturity. If we strive to follow the instructions of the Sermon on the Mount in the situations of our everyday life, for example, by giving up every fight against our neighbor, by recognizing in ever finer nuances the belligerence in our feelings, sensations, and thoughts, and defeating it with the help and through the power of the inner Christ, then His light will shine in us more and more, and we will experience His workings in everyday life in manifold ways. Those who learn to experience and sense Christ in themselves will gain inner support, independence, inner security and strength, gifts of the All-Highest that are indestructible, because God's power, love, and wisdom are everlasting. So let us become free in order to be free. To be free is the quality of life. To be free is peace. To be free is love and unity. So, become free and be free. Well, dear friends, it depends on us. We have it in our hands, for our life is the true school, in which we can make further experiences with these invaluable explanations from the divine wisdom and take steps toward freedom and unity in God. In this spirit, we wish all of us all the best, rich in learning experiences. Goodbye and greetings in God.